welcome to the San Diego Public Library. Thank you for being here today. We're in for a real treat. Today is the official opening of the Lincoln exhibit, which is brought to us by the ALA and the Constitution Center. With this event, with this opening, we're very fortunate to have Delores Fisher, Professor of Africana Studies at San Diego State University. Also, you may have seen her here at our band Books Week. You may also have seen her here telling us about landmark law cases. You may also have seen her here telling us about the magic that is Black Orpheus, or the contemporary remake, or Fable. You may have seen her here on any number of occasions. She's a great scholar and a great asset to our community. At this moment, I want to invite her forward because she is going to share with us on this date. It was November 19th in 1863 that the Gettysburg Address was given. We are going to hear the Gettysburg Address, and we're also going to hear some other of the contemporary thought. And we're going to be really fortunate to hear from Frederick Douglass. So we're going to hear some fiery stuff. I hope that you'll enjoy this, and we hope that you'll be able to enjoy this exhibit. It will be here through January 9th. So please welcome Professor Delores Fisher. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate such a wonderful introduction. I've forgotten many of the things that I participated in, and it is indeed an honor to be here today. I would like to start specifically with the Gettysburg Address. And one of the reasons I would like to start with the Gettysburg Address is because initially Lincoln was not the keynote speaker. There was a mesmerizing orator who was giving his speech. He stood up there for approximately 2 hours or so. And despite what the myth says that Lincoln had actually composed the Gettysburg Address on the train, it's been proven recently that he actually did not do it on the train. He took a long time to think about what he wanted to present because it was an opportunity to help to unite the Union, possibly over the Civil War, and it was also a PR moment for him to boost his presidency. So, without further ado, it was one of the shortest speeches. He got up, he was concise, and he sat down. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who have here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And this is Lincoln's Gettysburg Address as sent to Colonel Alexander Bliss. There were 5 specific writings that are credited to Lincoln. And then after the address, the newspapers printed others. And you know how media is. It takes and sometimes deletes and edits and does whatever. And so other versions obtain. But this is the Colonel Alexander Bliss version of the Gettysburg Address. And now, I found many versions also of Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech. In 1845, Frederick Douglass published his autobiography, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. He revealed how he escaped. He revealed his I think, and I stopped because every time I think of what I read, my heart just, it freezes almost. He talks about his trials, his tribulations, his beatings, his persistence to be free. A free man, free, totally free. And so when he escaped, he knew he wasn't going back. His story is long. We understand the twists and turns of Frederick Douglass's life, but now we see him in Rochester, New York. He had been warned by William Lord Garrison not to go to Rochester, New York to live. But Douglass had already visited Rochester and decided, well, yeah, I'm going to go to Rochester. He understood that it was free. New York State had granted freedom in 1827. But he did not understand that prejudice still prevailed. Bigotry still prevailed. And so when he was asked to give the speech, he was full of anger. He was changing from the person who thought, whatever time it takes, what little steps we can take, we'll do that. He was changing into someone who was more militant. And the speech reflects that. So I'm going to read excerpts from a speech given at Rochester, New York, July 5th, 1852. Fellow citizens, pardon me and allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to me, to us? Am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful, for who is there so cold that a nation's sympathy could not warm him? Who so obdurate and dead to the claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge such priceless benefits? Who so stolid and selfish that would not give his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee when the chains of servitude had been torn from his limbs? I am not that man. In a case like that, the dumb might eloquently speak, and the lame man leap as an hart. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight of that independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? so, there is a parallel to your conduct. And let me warn you that it is dangerous to copy the example of a nation, Babylon, whose crimes towering up to heaven were thrown down by the breath of the Almighty, burying that nation in irrevocable ruin. Fellow citizens, above your natural tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilant shouts that reach them. If I do forget, if I do not remember those bleeding children of sorrow this day, may my right hand forget her cunning, and may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason, most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world. My subject then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day in its popular characteristics from the slave's point of view. Standing here identified with the American bondsman making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave, on this occasion I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are so regarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery. The great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, or who is not a heart, a slave holder, shall not confess to be right and just. But I fancy I hear some of my audience say it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists failed to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point is the anti-slavery creed? And what point in that anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? That point is conceded readily already. Nobody doubts it. The slaveholders themselves acknowledge in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge this fact. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia which, if committed by the slave, by a black man, no matter how ignorant he is, subject him to the punishment of death. While only 2 of these same crimes will subject a white man to the same like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is moral, intellectual, and responsible? The manhood of the slave is conceded. It is admitted in the fact that Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding under severe fines and penalties the teaching of the slave to read and write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish in the sea that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I will argue that with you are false. I will argue with you that the slave is a man. For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. It is not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that we are engaged in all the enterprises common to other men. Digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian God and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave. We are called upon to prove that we are men? Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is that a question for Republicans? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter best set with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to understand? How should I, today, in the presence of Americans, dividing and subdividing a discourse to show that men have a natural right to freedom, speaking of it relatively and positively, negatively and affirmatively, how should I do this? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven who does not know that slavery is wrong for him. What? What, you say? What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, 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 I will not. I have better employment for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine? That God did not establish it? That our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? That they can, may, and do, well, I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke, for it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be denounced. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty, an unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow, mocking. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes that would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go search where you will. Roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world. Travel through South America. Search out every abuse. And when you have found the last day, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation. And you will say, with me, that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. This is an excerpt from Frederick Douglass' Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor.